Hello, my name's Paul, and in this video lesson I'm going to give you a quick overview of the layers panel in CS5, and it's very similar to the layers panel in other versions of CS. And specifically I'm going to look at adjustment layers and layer masks, so that by the end of the tutorial you'll have a good idea of how they work. There's a lot to cover, and we can't possibly hope to cover everything that the layers panel is capable of in just a few minutes, but as I say, hopefully by the end you'll have a good idea of the principles so that you can apply them in your own Photoshop work. Now, before we get into layers themselves, we're just going to take a quick look at the layout of the layers panel. If it's not visible, you just select it from the window drop down menu. I've unticked it there so it's disappeared. If I want it back, I can just tick it again, and you'll see at the top there are 3 tabs. Layers is usually selected by default. There's also channels, which gives you the different channel information, the different coloured channels that are in the image, and a tab called Pars, which shows you any Pars cutouts you've made using the pen tool. But as I say, it's the layers part of this panel that we'll be looking at in most detail. And down at the bottom here you've got various options. You've got an effects menu, which allows you to put drop shadows, inner shadows and bevels and so on images and text when you're combining them. There's also an icon for adding a layer mask, which we'll look at in a second, and there's an icon for creating an adjustment layer, and again we'll look at that in some detail. And finally there's a little icon down here which allows you to create a new layer. Now, as you can see in our landscape image here, there are lots of layers here stacked up in our layer stack, and they're all affecting our original colour image in various ways. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about what each of these layers is doing, but suffice it to say, if I click on this eye icon here, this visibility icon, I can turn each of these layers off in turn. Turn off all the effects I've added to get back to my original background layer. And I'm going to ignore all these for the time being, and I'm just going to get started by showing you how to create an adjustment layer, because this is something you'll be doing time and time again when you're editing in Photoshop. Now, before I create an adjustment layer, I'm just going to right click on this background layer and select duplicate layer from the drop down menu, call it background copy and click OK. And there we have a copy of my original colour image. Now, the reason I've done this is it's very good practice to create a copy, just in case you ever want to, you make a mistake or you want to go back to your original. You've always got your background layer intact and unaltered. Any adjustments I make will only affect the background copy and not the background, so I can always go back at any time. So background copy created, I can then go down to the half moon icon down here to create a new adjustment layer. There are various options to choose from. Some of you use more than others, but for the sake of argument I'm going to click on levels, and this brings up a new dialog box, and it allows me to tweak in this case the tones, the levels in the image. So if I have a play, if I just drag that across to 240, perhaps bring that in slightly. I'm not spending too much time on this, it's just for the sake of argument. And if once I'm happy, I can then just close that down, and there we have an adjustment layer, this levels adjustment layer, that's affecting my background copy. If I turn that on and off, that's off, and then that's the levels adjustment added on top. And it's added in a layer on top of my background copy. My background copy is actually still intact, and I could just delete this levels adjustment layer at any time, so it's sort of layering it on top. And the great thing, the very clever thing about adjustment layers is that if I double click on this little thumbnail here, I can bring up my adjustment at any time and tweak it. And this is the great power of adjustment layers, is that you can go back to them at any time. All you have to remember to do is to save any changes you make as a PSD file or a TIFF file with layers. If you save it as a JPEG, all these layers will be compressed and you'll lose the ability to edit them in the future. But allowing you to go back and change any changes you make is one of the great things about layers, and specifically adjustment layers. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to take a look at is layer masks, and to do that I'm just going to click through to my next image, and as you can see here is another layer stack with 4 layers and the layers panel. And again I can click on these eye icons so you can see the difference between all the images. And as you can see, all we've got is a sequence of a mountain biker jumping down a set of steps. And the idea is to use masks to combine all of these 4 images in one, so we get a stop motion effect of the cyclist in the 4 different positions. Now to do that, I'm just going to turn off these 2 layers here. I'm going to select layer 1 and I'm going to create a layer mask. But to try and explain the way layer masks work, I'm actually going to create a black mask by clicking on the Add Layer Mask icon down here, but holding down Alt at the same time, and this will create a black layer mask. Now, effectively, what this black mask is doing is it's masking out everything that's in this layer so that all we can see is this layer here. If I turn this mask off, like so, by holding down the Shift key, then I've turned the mask off and we can now see this layer. But if I turn it back on again, I've masked out this layer and all I can now see is this layer. Okay, so in order to see our cyclist in this position here, what we need to do is we need to cut a hole, a cyclist shaped hole in the mask here so that we can see the cyclist below. And to do that, to create a hole in a mask, what we need is to use a white. Using white makes the layer visible, using black masks it out. So to do that, I'm going to select the foreground colour to white down here using these arrows. This is our, I can press D to go to the default white and black here, and then X to toggle back and forth. So I want to make sure my foreground colour is white, so I press X. Then I'm going to grab the brush tool. I'm going to set a size around about the size of my cyclist, something like that, perhaps possibly. And at the moment I can't see the cyclist, so I don't quite know where to cut my hole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off this mask again, hold down the Shift key just to turn it off temporarily. I'm going to set the opacity to 100% and the flow to 100% because I want my cutout, my hole, to be completely white. If I set these at 50%, say, then I'll be making a cutout that's sort of semi-transparent. I'll be able to half see the bike, but half not. Really, I want to make a white, a perfect cutout. So all I need to do now is draw around my cyclist. Now, you won't see anything on the cyclist on the image here, but what you can see is a cyclist shape starting to appear in my layer mask over here. And this is the hole I'm creating in the mask to reveal the cyclist below. So if I just carry on, just drawing around there, making sure I get every last bit of the bike and my cyclist and his helmet. And I don't need to be too finicky here because the background, the trees and everything in the background are identical in every image. I shot this shot on a tripod, so I can be fairly rough and ready. Now I've created my cyclist cutout, and now if I hold down the Shift key again and click on this mask to activate it, hey presto, what I've done is I've cut a hole in the mask to reveal this cyclist below. So now what I can see is I can see all of this background image, which is here, and then layered on top I can see a single cyclist from this layer. And I can go on and do the same thing for these layers up here. So I can create another layer mask. Oops, just go back, click on layer 2, create another black mask. And again, I can just draw around the cyclist to cut him out. I'll do this quite quickly just so you can see what I'm doing. And there's another shape, another hole. If I reactivate the mask, all I'm doing is I'm masking out everything in this layer apart from the cyclist here. And sure enough, I'm starting to see my sequence of images come together. Now, as with adjustment layers, the great thing about layer masks is that you can go back at any time and tweak them, adjust them, make them more or less opaque using the slider up here. Let's say I drag that along here, you can see the cyclist becoming more and less opaque. And I can use my brush to paint black, say, if I want to paint black back in, if I want to put the mask, mask out the cyclist again, all I have to do is draw over him like that, and you can see I'm starting to blacken mask over my hole that I've created to erase this cyclist. And you can see the effect that's having on the layer mask over here. I'm basically filling in that hole I've created so that you can no longer see the cyclist below. Okay, so we've seen how black masks work to mask things out. And the next thing I'm going to look at is exactly the same thing, but in reverse. So if I go to this image here, this portrait, and you can see we've got a background layer and we've got a soft focus layer above. I've created a layer using one of the blurring options here, and you can see it's blurred our sharp image and it's just softened all the features. And this is quite an effective way of perhaps retouching portraits with blemishes. You can just soften the features, but of course by softening the features like that, we've not only blurred the skin tones and smoothed out the skin tones, we've also blurred and smoothed out the detail in the eyes and the lips. And this is where masks come in handy. You can paint black on a white mask to mask out the blurring of this layer and reveal the sharp layer below. And I'll just show you how to do that in a sec. So we click soft focus, make sure this layer is selected, click on the layer mask icon. This time we're creating just a standard white, default white layer mask, and we want to make sure that our foreground color is set to black this time. And what I might do is actually might tweak the opacity of our brush and the flow just so I can build things up more gradually. This allows us to paint the detail in the eyes back in bit by bit. I set those both to 50%. Make sure our brush is roughly the right size, that looks about right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint in black the areas of blurred layer that I want to mask out to reveal this sharp layer below. So if I just paint slowly over the eyes, and you'll see this black blob appearing in the layer mask, and all this is doing is it's masking out the blurred layer I've created to reveal the sharp layer beneath. And I can do that with the other eye, and I can just do it with the lips. And for the sake of this tutorial, I've made the blur much more obvious than you might normally. You wouldn't normally blur the face this much, but it makes it obvious exactly what it is we're trying to do. And you can see a face shape starting to appear in the layer mask where I've masked out the blurred layer to reveal the sharp layer below. And it's exactly the same as I was doing in the jump shot, but only this time I'm painting black on white to mask out small areas rather than white on black to reveal small areas. So as you can see, this is an effective way of revealing detail. And again, if I decide that the blurring is too much, I can click on this blur layer and I can dial the opacity down. If I dial it down to 0, then I can see through this layer completely, and all I've got is the background layer below. If I drag it up, it increasingly softens the image, and all the way up to 100% where it's really soft and blurred. So I might go for, say, 40%, which just softens the skin tone slightly and makes for a more realistic effect. As with our mountain biking shot, the great thing about these layer masks is that once I've created them, as long as I save my image as a PSD or a TIFF file, I can go back to them at any time and tweak them to my heart's content. So let's say I'm not happy with the mask I've created here, I can change my brush to white and I can tweak things. I can paint over the eye here to basically erase the mask I've created and reveal the blurred layer again. And if I'm not happy, if I think actually it hasn't worked, I'm going to go back. All I have to do is go back to black, maybe ramp up the opacity and just draw in my mask again, my black mask, to reveal the detail, the sharp detail in the layer below. Okay, so we've had a look at adjustment layers and layer masks, but the one thing we haven't really touched on is blending modes. So just going to have a quick look at that. If I press Control Tab on my keyboard to tab through to my next image, which is a castle reflected in a lake, and then Control Tab again to bring up a firework shot, I'm going to select the lasso tool, and I'm just going to make a rough and ready selection of my firework in a dark night sky, and then I'm going to go to Edit Copy and go back to my castle and go to Edit Paste and paste that back in, and you can see it just gets plonked in a new layer in the layer stack on top of my background layer. And as it is, if I were trying to blend these two, that wouldn't really be acceptable, but this is where blending modes comes in, and blending modes are accessed up here from this drop down, and they essentially allow you to dictate how pixels from this layer or any layer interact with pixels from layers below. And if I make sure layer 1 is selected, I'm going to choose just one of these as an example to give you an idea of how it works. I'm going to select lighten, and lighten basically means that only the pixels in this layer that I've just pasted on that are lighter than the pixels in the layer below will appear. So if I click on lighten, any of the darker pixels will disappear, and all I'll be able to see is the lighter pixels. And hey presto, there you have our fireworks overlaid on our background image. And if I grab the move tool, I can move that over here so it's out of the way of the castle and doesn't look so plonked on. I can select the background layer, and there you have a more realistic composite, and I could obviously add more fireworks across the sky here to create a realistic fireworks display above the castle. Now, as I say, there are various options in the blending mode menu here, and I've given you one as an example, but you can experiment with the others in your own time, and they really are very useful when you're merging multiple images in Photoshop. So there you have it, really, a very quick guided tour of the layers panel. Now, I realise it's a bit rough and ready, we can't possibly cover everything, but hopefully it'll give you some idea of the basics so that you can start applying some of these skills and start using layers in your own Photoshop work.